Good evening. Let me welcome each one of you to tonight's council meeting. First item is invocation. Tonight's invocation will be led by our fire chaplain, J.D. Brown.
Thank you, Your Honor. The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty God, we give you thanks for the blessings that you've showered on this community. We ask you to share your wisdom with this governing body as they make decisions that promote the welfare and harmony of the people of this town. We also give you thanks for the emergency responders who protect this community and lives and property therein, especially Sunnyvale Fire and Rescue. We ask you to continue to pour out your strength, encouragement, and blessing upon them. Use their sacrificial action as a witness to your love. Grant them your protection against the perils of the fire service. And by your mercy, escort them safely in a return to their homes at the end of their shift. We pray this in the name of all that is holy and in my own tradition. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Father. Yes, sir. Please join me standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. Good evening, council and members of the audience and staff. Let me welcome you to the regular town council meeting for Monday, April 12th, 2021. Now time is 7:02. For the record, all council members except Mr. Egan are present. With the 6 of the 7 being present, we have a quorum. And Mr. Egan is on travel this week. Let me start with the introductions. The first item on the agenda, that's the introduction of new and promoted employees. Jeremiah Shepard, police officer. Matthew Connelly, firefighter. Jennifer Patterson, court clerk. And Larry Graff, building inspector. That be Susan?
Sir, Chief Hawks is going to introduce Jeremiah.
Mayor, Council.
Good evening, Chief.
Let me introduce our newest officer, Officer Jeremiah Shepard. Was born and raised in the Dallas area and is a graduate in 2006 of Roy City High School. Jeremiah is happily married and has 4 children. After graduating high school, Jeremiah enlisted in the United States Navy and served as a fire controlman, working on computer systems and refurbishing weapon systems. He achieved the rank of Petty Officer First Class, or E6. Jeremiah served aboard the USS Vandergrift, and his final duty station was at Norfolk Naval Station. After separating from the Navy in 2015, Jeremiah sought to serve his community at home as a police officer and began taking college classes. He originally began his career with the Hutto Police Department in 2016 and then transferred to Murphy Police Department, where he was employed when we stole him from them. Jeremiah hopes to leave a legacy of service that others will follow. He is a basic peace officer and a licensed FDO. Please help me welcome Simon.
Mayor, if you all want to stay down there, we've got 3 more to do. If you'd like, just step to the side. Okay, and Chief Kendrick is going to introduce Firefighter Connelly.
Okay, we'll turn around there. They're all here. This is Matt Connelly. That's it. Move on to the agenda. Mr. Connelly came from us from East Texas. He's quite diverse in fire and EMS. Has been in the EMS business and fire for about 12 years. Currently, when he came to us, he was working in the ER hospital down in Tyler, and he's been in the hospital, and also he's been a flight medic. So he finally landed and came to us, and his wife is also a nurse and a flight medic as well. So runs in the family. So probably glad to have him on the fire department and in the community as well. So welcome, Matt.
Okay. Next, I'm going to introduce Jennifer Patterson. Jennifer, if you could start making your way up to the front. So Jennifer has been with the Town of Sunnyvale since September of 2016. You might recognize her as she was a library clerk since that time, and she's worked part-time holding down another job just to remain part of the Sunnyvale team. So we've been looking for a place to promote her to because she's such an exemplary employee, and we had a vacancy in the court, and so she has been promoted to court clerk full-time, and we're just really excited that we can see that progression throughout the organization and promote quality individuals from within. So if we can give her some applause and welcome her to her new position. And we have one more new hire, and we're going to have Doug Key introduce Larry Gaff.
So Larry comes to us as our building inspector. Since we've been growing so largely here in the town of Sunnyvale, we felt that we needed to bring on somebody else to kind of help me do some of the day-to-day services in the building inspection department. So Larry, he kind of grew up in the construction business all his life. His family's been in construction, and so he is very well versed in what he is doing and what he is learning with us. And so he's been married 35 years to his wife Eva, who's back there.
He has two boys. One goes to Oklahoma State University, where he's studying mechanical technician. And then his son is at home right now. His son's actually achieved the commendation of Eagle Scouts, so that's nice. Larry himself is actually an assistant scoutmaster with the troop over there in Forney at Troop 1857. Okay, and he also is a journeyman plumber. So we're excited to have Larry here with us because he brings a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge that's going to help us to be able to continue to grow here in Sunnyvale.
All right, that's an exciting time to have so many good, highly qualified and experienced staff joining Town of Sunnyvale. That's great. Okay, it's time for announcements. This is the time council or staff may make announcements. Council, are there any announcements for tonight? Okay, if there's none, Susan, staff, anybody has announcements? Okay, we're going to close that item. Moving on to the public forum. This is the time you may come forward and speak to the council on any items other than personal matters or legal matters or items on the agenda. So if there's anyone from the audience who would like to come forward and speak to the council, you may come forward at this time. If you're joining us via Zoom, you may raise your hand. No one is coming forward from the chamber. Erica, anyone raising their hand?
No hands raised.
No hands raised, so I'm going to close the public forum. I'm going to move on to a very important portion of the agenda, that's recognition. That's recognition of Fire Chaplain J.D. Brown for his dedication and public service to the Town of Sunnyvale for over a decade. Chief?
Thank you, Mayor and Council. It's an honor to be here in recognition of JD. He's been very special to us, and I appreciate this opportunity. JD has served our country and is an important part of the fire department for many years, as you mentioned, 12 years this June, and has the respect of all the members. It's important to have the chaplain within the department to help us deal with the stress of the job and what we witness in our job. He's been more than a chaplain to us with the fellowship, and at times he's opened his church to us, especially on September, where we come and memorialize the ones that have lost in September 11, 2001. So at this time, we're glad to have him, although he will be taking the steps of retiring and actually going to the Carolinas. So, maybe he'll start praying for hurricanes to stay away or something like that. So, Jay, if you and Evelyn would come up, please. We have a couple of things for you, JD. I was going to tell you to wear your fire helmet here, but I figured it would be related too much. So, we have a certificate as well in recognition, dedication, and service of the members of FFR from 2009 to 12 through the 12th, and his Father Brown's presenting the appreciation award for Sunnyvale. We certainly appreciate that and your professionalism has become. Here's the good one, buddy. Look at this. So we want to present you with this plaque. As the fireman's chaplain goal is to aid, comfort, and support the fire department family. Thank you for always being there for Sunnyvale Fire Rescue, 2009 to 2021.
Except for the occasional site trip to
Ozona. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a distinct honor of mine to serve with the department for this time frame, and I've gotten as much from my affiliation with them as they have from me. They keep me energized to go back into the parish and be able to do the mundane things that we do down there. I get to explore my profanity with them on occasion. And there's some very, very good friendships that we've made here. So I appreciate the opportunity to have been able to serve, and we'll miss you guys greatly. Thank you.
We're going to ask you in 7 years if you remember their name. But
It burns. It burns. I'm gonna get back there. I'm gonna hide back there. I want everybody. I want to hide behind.
Well, somebody can stand in front of me.
Drew's good. Drew is the shortest. Make him look tall, Drew. Thanks, sir.
Let's get started with the rest of the business. Council, I have 3 items on the consent agenda. Item number 3, that is consider approval of minutes of the regular meeting of the town council for March 22nd, 2021. Item number 4, minutes for the Town Council Planning Workshop for March 29th. Item number 5, act upon resolution 21-14, declaring certain property as surplus and authorizing the town manager to execute the sale, trade, donation, and disposal of said property. Would anyone like to remove any of the items from the consent agenda? Okay, if not, can I have a motion to approve consent agenda items 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 as presented?
Motion to approve consent agenda items 1,
3, 4, 5.
3, 4, 5.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Eldridge and seconded by Mr. Cler to approve consent agenda item 3, 4, and 5. All in favor signify. All opposed. Motion passed 6-0. Mr. Egan is absent. Moving on to the public hearing portion of the agenda. Hold a public hearing. Item number 6. Hold a public hearing, discuss, consider, and act upon the first reading of Ordinance 21-08, granting a special use designation for an accessory dwelling unit on the property zone single family 2, located generally at 280 East Trip Road, case 1693 SUD LE accessory dwelling unit. Charles? Good evening, sir.
Council. Good evening. The subject property is located at 280 East Trip Road and is currently a vacant tract of 3,085 square feet that's zoned single family 2. The owner intends to construct their primary residence on the property. At the same time, they'd like to construct an accessory dwelling unit as well behind the main residence that would be used by another member of the family. The UDO requires that a special use designation be approved in order to construct an accessory dwelling unit. The unit itself would be a single-story, 3,060 square foot home, similar in appearance to the proposed primary residence. The building meets all of the requirements of the UDO, and the Planning and Zoning Commission considered the request at their March 17th meeting and recommended forward for approval.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Let me open up for public comments. If there's anyone from the audience who would like to come forward and speak to the council on item number 6, you may come forward. If you're joining us via Zoom, you may raise your hand. No one is coming forward from the chamber. Erica, anyone raising their hand?
No hands raised.
No hands raised, so I'm going to close the public comments. Council, this is the time for our discussion. Charles, let me ask you, I'm interested to hear there's a second family leaving another member. Is that going to be still one ownership, or will it be two ownership, two addresses, two water connections?
It is one ownership, and it would be like a mother-in-law suite or something like that, that they would live in the second unit, but it's one owner, one address.
So our utility, everything will be
Yes.
all just connected to the one account.
Yes, sir.
I was interested. I was curious why it was specified as it's a second family member. That's why. Okay, thank you. Council, any questions for staff?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
So I believe there's plans for the trails to go south there. There's a trail north of there that goes right next to the falls and the glacier track. And then there was a plan to have a trail that goes south next to it. Will that have any impact on that planned trail?
I don't believe so. My assumption is that trail would stay within the easement area next to this property. And obviously all the construction would stay on the private property as well. So my assumption is it would not impact the trail.
All right, thank you.
Okay, are there additional discussions on item number 6?
Charles, I have a question. Anytime I see an actual second house going up beside, behind a different house, are there restrictions as far as this being leased out, being basically rented out as an apartment at some point? I mean, I'm assuming that if it's being built this way, then it has to stay attached to the primary residence.
So there's no restriction that I recall on it being leased out, but it must stay under the same ownership as the primary residence. actually, hold on, I'm reading all of the requirements here. It says accessory dwelling unit may be sold separately from sale of the entire property, including the principal dwelling unit, and shall not be leased or sublet. So there it is. It can't be leased.
Excellent, thank you.
I was thinking the same. Okay, it cannot be something. Okay. That answered your concern?
That is good.
Okay, council, are there additional discussions on item number 6? Okay, if there are none, I call for a motion. I did. I opened the public hearing at the beginning and closed it.
Motion to approve.
Second. Motion made by Mr. Eldridge and second by Finch to approve item number 6. Everyone heard the motion? All in favor signify. All opposed, motion passed 6-0. Brenda, I know I have memory issues, so as a habit, I just kind of do that first thing. So this is the thing I do. That's my,
I always check it off when it's
and
done.
I appreciate you keeping it
Just
straight.
looking at the plan for the house while you did it.
Not a problem. Thank you for keeping it straight. Okay, moving on to item number 7, hold a public hearing. Discuss, consider, and act upon a replat of 5 residential lots totaling 17.4 acres located generally at the southwest corner of Collins Road and Town East Boulevard. Charles, good evening.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. The council may recall that the town approved a final plat for the McGee Trace Edition back in November of 2020. As a reminder, this covered 5 lots totaling about 17.4 acres at the southwest corner of Collins Road and Town East Boulevard. The owners are back now requesting to adjust the property lines interior to the site between 2 of the lots. Specifically, we're talking about the rear property line of Lot 1 and the side property line of Lot 4. The change is strictly at their request and does not impact any town requirements, so staff recommends approval. I did want to take a second and point out that this plat is a little bit different from typical plats that we hear because it's what's called a residential replat. Anytime you are doing a replat of a lot that is for residential use, state law requires that you hold a public hearing. And so typically where we've talked about doing plats on consent, or some plats not even having to go to council, final plats, this one per state law, because it has to do with residential properties, requires a public hearing. It's still a ministerial function. If it meets all the requirements, which this one does, it must be approved.
Does go to PNC already, and PNC?
Yes, and PNC heard this in their March meeting and recommended approval.
Good evening to the applicant. Would you like to come forward and speak to the council, sir?
Absolutely. I'm
Sir?
Randy Harden.
Sir, would you go state your name and address?
Randy Harden, 370 Town East Boulevard.
Good evening, sir.
I know this isn't for tonight, but I sent it to you just so you guys know we're wanting to take the McGee, Homer, and Jane's house and let my son-in-law over there and my daughter remodel it. So that will be the next request, that we need to carve out an acre around that house. But other than that, hopefully, Lord willing, we're done. Trust me, you don't know how much I want to be done. But I appreciate your help.
Thanks again, Randy. Like I mentioned, we also want to help you and want to work with it. And we got Charles and Susan. Work with them. We will do everything possible to help you, within the rules. Right on.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Okay, I'm going to open up for public comments. If there's anyone from the members of the audience who would like to speak to the council on item number 7, you may come forward. If you are joining us via Zoom, you may raise your hand. No one is coming forward from the chamber. Erica, anyone raising their hand?
No hands raised.
No hands raised. We're going to close the public comments. Council, are there any questions or discussions on item number 7?
Question, Mayor. Charles, in looking at this, may just be a picture issue, but I'm looking at page 28, the blue section. I noticed there is looks like an easement between the one house, top right, and the middle lot. But I look at the actual drawing, and I don't see an easement there. Is that just a line issue, like between lot 2 and 3, I don't see that on there. So I was just curious.
So that was actually an issue that was addressed when we approved the final plat in November. That sort of flagpole out to Town East was removed. The issue with this map is it lags about a year. We get our maps from DCAD, and so every year there's a little bit of a lag anytime property lines change for our GIS to change. So this is how it used to be, whereas the plat itself is how it is currently.
Thank you. Just want to clarify. Thank you.
Council, are there additional questions on item number 7?
I have one question.
Ms. Adam?
Charles, to the east of that, the triangle area of the land between Collins and Town East, does that belong to the town? Is that an easement?
So there is an area immediately next to this property that is, I believe, owned by the town. It's considered right-of-way, but then there's kind of an island of private property that is privately owned, I believe. I think I looked at that when I was doing the zoning verification or the zoning notices.
So the triangle is private.
That's my recollection, but I can pull it up on DCAD real quick to confirm. Yeah, it's owned by TF Stony Creek LP, which their mailing address is out of Miami Beach, Florida.
Okay. Are there additional questions or discussion on item number 7? Okay, if there are none, I call for a motion.
Motion to approve item number 7 as presented.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Freeman, seconded by Allen to approve item number 7 as presented. Everyone heard the motion? Are there additional discussions? There are none. All in favor signify. All opposed. Motion passed 6-0. Mr. Egan is absent. Moving on to item number 8. Thank you, Mr. Hardin, for joining us tonight. Yes, sir. Okay. Got it. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 8. Hold a public hearing. Discuss, consider, and act upon the first reading of ordinance 21-07, granting a specific use designation for alcoholic beverage sales on the property zoned local retail located generally at 3630 North Bellland Road. Charles, good evening one more time.
Good evening again. This is a request for the property located at 3630 North Beltline Road, which is just a little north of the intersection of Beltline and Town East. The property is zoned local retail. La Tacos Carretera opened in Suite 200 a couple months ago in the former GFC chicken space. They're now requesting a special use designation to allow them to sell alcoholic beverages for on-premises consumption. The applicant has provided a site plan and a floor plan that shows this will be a restaurant that complies with all the requirements necessary to qualify for a specific use designation. Again, the Planning and Zoning Commission considered this request at their March 17th meeting and recommended it forward for approval subject to no conditions.
So we have notices were sent out, and there is one in favor. No other notices, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, let me open up for public comments. Item number 8. If there's anyone from the members of the audience who would like to come forward and speak to the council, you may come forward at this time. If you're joining us via Zoom, you may raise your hand. No one is coming forward from the chamber. Erica, anyone raising their hand?
There are no hands raised.
No hands raised, so I'm going to close the public comments. Council, Are there any questions or discussions on item number 8? If there are none, I call for a motion.
Motion to approve item number 8
Second.
As presented.
as presented.
Okay, motion made by Mr. Clark and second by Mr. Eldridge to approve item number 8 as presented. Everyone heard the motion? Are there additional discussions? If there are none, all in favor signify. All opposed, motion passed 6-0. Charles, this is the first reading, so the second one will go on a consent agenda.
Yes, sir.
But council will have the option to pull it if they choose to do so.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Item number 9, hold a public hearing, discuss, consider, and act upon the first reading of Ordinance 21-10 and Ordinance amending Ordinance 20-22, which made appropriations for the support of the Town of Sunnyvale for the fiscal year beginning October 1, 2020 and ending September 30, 2021, and amending the annual budget of the Town of Sunnyvale for the 2021 fiscal year. Phyllis, good evening.
Good evening. Can y'all hear me? Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As a result of the mid-year budget review, it is found that various shortages or overages do exist in certain revenue and expenditure categories within the adopted 2020-2021 budget. Additionally, as a result of the recent street maintenance, the Mayor Town Council requested that funds from reserves be allocated to address critical street repairs and reconstruction in the interest of public safety. Okay. As approved by Resolution 2109. The fiscal impact for these mid-year budget changes would be to take the general fund operating days to 123 days. There is no change to the general fund economic development fund or the general fund bond proceeds fund. The mid-year budget changes are simply reallocations from one line item to the next. The 4B Economic Development Corporation would see a net revenue increase of $81,375, and the Home Amenities Fund would see a net expense increase of $58,359, which is a lapse appropriation from the 2019-2020 budget year for Collins Road. There's a PowerPoint that goes with this, Erica. If I can get you to just go to page 4. No. One more. Go back one more. There you go. Okay, I'm just going to touch on some of the highlights on this. For the general fund, Fund 11, these mid-year changes will result in an overall increase in revenues of $51,783. That's primarily due to not having budgeted originally for the school resource officer contract with the Sunnyvale Independent School District, which was at $80,000. Expenses are going to see an overall increase of $2,027,250, and that is primarily due to the road maintenance increase of $1,998,000 per Resolution 21-09, which was approved by Town Council on March the 8th. The 2020-2021 mid-year adjustments result in a net position change of $1,975,467. The amount of the 2020-2021 budget funded by reserves totals $2,576,981, provides 123 days of operating expenses. It does include the November 2020 roll forwards. Current fund balance policy requires 90 days of operating expenses. So if you'll go-
Can you pause just one second? I saw some looks of consternation. I'm going to chime in here because even for me, when I was reading this, I was like, what? So the part that got me was where it says the amount of the 2021 budget funded by reserves totals the 2.5 million. Because I know we're only really changing the 1.9 million that we're pulling from reserves in order to do the DMAIC projects. But the difference is the stuff that we did back in November. Remember the roll forwards, things that were from last year's budget that had lapsed, and we rolled them forward. So that's being added to this. So that's why that number looks like more than, because now we've done it in 2 different steps. Correct, Phyllis?
That's correct. And you can see at the bottom, there's a little box at the bottom of that page that does show what your original budgeted expenses were, what the roll forwards are, and what this mid-year budget amendment is. That's that total of $2,576,981. Total expenses are a little over $2.6 million. You have your increase in your revenues of $51,783. Okay, the next page, Erica, is really just gives a little more detail on what those line items are that we're making those adjustments to. And also in the box in the far upper right-hand column corner there, you can see the calculation to show the number of operating days to 123.
And on that middle change where it says sales tax incentives, that was, we decided to add that to really make it very clear that money coming in and that money going back out. Because if you recall, the Whataburger contract had an incentive based upon their revenues. So we're just trying to make it really clear that that's what that is versus just, we didn't have anything budgeted to spend that. So we wanted to make a line item that showed that. And this is prorated based upon how much we think will happen this year.
Okay, the next page. This is Fund 12, which is the General Fund Economic Development Fund. There is no change to this budgeted fund. We're reallocating $500,000 from line item land acquisition 612-6405, and we're moving it to line item 612-6404 for road reconstruction maintenance, and that is per resolution 21-09. And as a note, funding for these particular items will roll into the next year if they're not fully expended in the current year. Again, that next page gives you just some additional detail on those line items that we're moving the money, the $500,000 from one line item to the next. So there's no change to that particular fund balance. The next page is Fund 72, and that is our general fund bond proceeds. Part of the 2020 COs of $1.644 million were for to be determined capital projects. That particular line item, again, there's no net change to the fund balances. We're reallocating $500,000 from to be determined capital projects to a line item for road reconstruction, again, per resolution 21-09. And as with the fund prior, if this funding for these particular projects will roll to the next year if they're not fully expended in the current budget year. Again, that page just gives you some additional line item information. The next fund is going to be the 4B Economic Development Fund. The net increase to revenues for 4B will be $116,875, and that is to increase their sales tax line item so that it matches with the general fund assumptions. 4B does have to approve their budget prior to the town council approving the budget, and so these changes they're making at mid-year so that they're in line with what the approved town council budget was. Expenses are being increased by $66,501, and that's primarily to rolling forward planning services, which is for the Parks Master Plan that lapsed in 2019-2020, that's $46,101. And the Vineyard Park improvements was a roll forward. The parking lot improvements that were made there lapsed, and that's a $14,400 change. So you can see for the Fund 92 4B Economic Development Corporation, it's a net increase to their fund balance of $50,374. The next fund is going to be Fund 93, that's homestead amenities. That the mid-year adjustments will be an increase in expenses from $58,359. This is a 2019-2020 lapse appropriation, and that is for the support of the Collins Road Project Phase 1. Once you get past this particular page on the PowerPoint, the rest of it is in code detail that we provided for your review.
Phyllis, I know you're stepping in for the last second. I appreciate you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Prepared with all the details. Let me open up for public comments. If anyone from the members of the audience would like to speak to the council, you may come forward. If you're joining us via Zoom, you may raise your hand. No one is coming forward from the chamber. Erica, anyone raising their hands?
No, sir.
No hands raised. We're going to close the public comments. Erica, can we go to the top of that PowerPoint? Let's just start go one by one. Just make sure that it's a lot of information, very well put together. Thank you. Beautifully done. Thanks. Thanks for the details. Just gonna go page by page, make sure that council is good with it.
Do you want me to share the screen again?
Yes, ma'am. Please. Yeah, the second one. Yeah. Go to page number 3. Oh, you're there. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Franchise fees again. Phyllis, what happened there? The franchise fees.
That was Atmos, and their payment came in much lower than expected.
Okay. I know the school resource officer thing. I know that one sales incentive. I know that road maintenance. That's a resolution. Okay. Police department fuel budget 23,000 based on. Is that something we did not plan for it? Is that
right? We just, I think, this was our first year of that budget. We made an estimate based upon the study, and it just wasn't reasonable. And, we've double checked that with other departments. Not only have fuel costs gone up, but it just wasn't appropriately budgeted to begin with. So we are going to have to.
So they said 23,000 plus up. So they had already some money. It's a plus up.
That's correct. This is what we're increasing it by.
Okay. Council, any questions on this page?
The only question that I have is, when did we approve the SRO?
It was contractually approved. I brought it to council. I don't have the date in front of me, but it was done by resolution and contract. Both we approved it, as did the school district. And there's a lot of complexities to how it's budgeted, but basically they pay us for 3/4 of the cost of 2 officers. Plus they paid us for, it was half, I'm talking off the top of my head, but half of the contract to purchase the 2 vehicles and other equipment for those officers. So when we bill them each month, we bill our actual expense, and we pay 1/4. They pay 3/4 of those officers, but we'll get them back in the summer when they're not working at the school. This was, the timing of it was kind of weird, which is why it wasn't budgeted originally. I think it happened kind of after we'd baked the budget. So the way it kind of happens is that funding is not allocated in the PD budget. We only allocated for 1/4, which is what our expense is. So normally this would be offsetting PD's budget, but because they've had vacancies, they're still running, I think, at 46.5% of their budget on payroll right now. So they're right on track with where they should be. So this is money will kind of sit out there in the general fund, and if we need it in their budget, it'll go there. If not, it'll end up rolling into excess reserves.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions on this page? Okay, let's go to the next page. Page number 44. Council, any questions on page number 44? Moving on to page number, next page, Fund 72. That's the general fund bond proceeds. Any questions on that one? That's page 8 of 77 is what I see on my chart. Okay, then now let's go to the next one. That's Fund 92. That's the page 10 of the package. Any questions on the 4B Economic Development Corporation?
Just one question about this car mileage allowance. Is that, talk a little bit about that?
It was part of the offer. I think we honestly just probably missed it in the original budget. Also, if you remember, he was interim and then went to full-time and was actually offered the position. So I think it kind of happened during that window. So when we were doing mid-year budget reviews, we caught that it wasn't baked in there.
And that's just a flat amount we pay, not actually doing mileage.
It's not mileage, it's a car allowance. He uses his personal vehicle for work purposes. It's part of his compensation.
The additional questions on this item. Okay, moving on to Fund 93, Homestead Amenities. Any questions? The straight call and sort project, I think. Okay, Council, are there any I want to make sure go through one by one. That way, if there are any questions we can ask staff for the discussion right now or details. Are there any additional discussions before we go for a motion? Okay. If there are none, I call for a motion on item number 9.
Motion to approve.
Motion made by Mr. Eldridge. Do you have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Clark to approve item number 9 as presented. Are there additional discussions? If there's none. All in favor signify. All opposed. Motion passed 6-0. Phyllis, thank you very much. Will this be a consent agenda, or this budget will come back for a second?
Typically budgets we bring on the agenda, so if there's anybody who wants to speak.
Gotcha, thanks. Okay, moving on to item number 10. Consider and act upon the second reading of Ordinance 21-05, amending various articles of Chapter 2, Animal Control of the Code of Ordinances to adopt revised regulations for the keeping of animals within the town. Mr. Goff.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm back for an encore. This is the second reading of the changes to the animal control ordinance that we walked through in more detail during the first reading at the last meeting. We wanted to bring this back on the regular agenda and circle back to one of the things we brought up in the changes since there were some questions about that issue. And as a reminder, what we're talking about is that the ordinance currently allows for the keeping of 2 livestock animals weighing less than 300 pounds and 1 livestock animal weighing more than 300 pounds on lots, and what the ordinance says currently is 2 acres or less. What that means is that there really is no minimum lot size for the keeping of livestock animals. What we talked about was perhaps a change that would change that or less to or more, and that would create a floor of 2 acres for the keeping of livestock animals. There was some conversation about would there be people that would potentially be impacted by it. I think there could be. There have been situations in the past where we've had to limit the number of animals on a property. There's been at least one situation in town where they had 2 livestock animals on a property, but one was received an exemption for a 4-H project, which the ordinance allows for. So I think there would be some situations where if the ordinance was changed to or more, that people would be, as we talked about last time, grandfathered in. The current animals would be allowed to stay, but as those animals went away, they would not be able to be replaced with new animals. So 3 options just for the council to consider. 1, you could leave the ordinance as is, knowing that that means that there is no minimum requirement for the keeping of livestock animals. The second option is to just simply change the word less to more. And again, that creates a floor of 2 acres for the keeping of these animals. again, that would mean that some people would be grandfathered in currently, but eventually that they would have to comply with the ordinance over time. Or an option 3, if the council is looking for some middle ground, would be to address the acreage as well. So maybe you could change it to, instead of 2 acres or more, 1 acre or more, so that 1 acre becomes the floor. So again, because there was some discussion about that last time, some questions, we wanted to bring that back, but there's 3 options for your consideration.
Can you go back one more time on 3 options?
Yeah, so option 1 would be to leave the ordinance as is, so keep it to where it says 2 acres or less, knowing that that means that effectively there is no floor to the size of a lot for keeping an animal, so to be allowed on any lot. Option 2 would be as staff has drafted it, and that was really just to generate conversation, but to change, instead of 2 acres or less, change it to 2 acres or more. That creates 2 acres as the floor for the keeping of livestock animals. Or option 3 would be kind of a middle ground in between there of changing it to 1 acre or more, so that 1 acre becomes the floor.
And, sir, if I could, Charles and I had a lot of conversation about this because my concern was if I buy a property thinking I can have horses, and if my horses pass away, and then to find out I can't replace them. I mean, a lot of people buy property because of an ability to do something. So that was my concern. So that's why we wanted to bring you some options. You know, many communities have 1 acre as the minimum, so that's why we threw that in as an option for you. Otherwise, you could have a situation where somebody thinks, I bought a property thinking I could have horses and now I can't.
Yeah, I remember the same discussion from the past. I remember
Yes, sir.
it also. Okay, let me open up for public comments first. At number 10, if anyone from the members of the audience would like to speak to the council on item number 10, you may come forward. If you are joining us via Zoom, you may raise your hand. No one is coming forward from the chamber. Erica, anyone raising their hands?
No hands raised.
No hands raised. So I'm going to close the public comments. Council, time for our discussions. Charles, let me ask you, are there any complaints from citizens or anybody in leaving it as such? Is there a reason why we should change that to a more restrictive?
We have not received any complaints that I'm aware of. It was just when we were doing a review of the ordinance, again, there's this standard in there that if you read it the way it's written now, it basically isn't a standard. So it was just really a cleanup thing for us, but we weren't sure how you all wanted to clean it up. So we brought it to your attention, changed it just again to kind of generate some conversation, but there's really, I don't think there's any magic to doing it one way or the other.
Council, are there additional discussions on this topic?
Mayor, I like the changes that have been made, specifically the 2 acre or more. I think I'm okay with that. However, I think that if we're going to grandfather those that could be affected, and I think there are some, I think we should specifically state that somewhere other than just in this council minutes that you can be you'll be grandfathered in. Grandfather to me is a tricky word. Who's going to remember that, what we mean on that? So I don't know where we put that in on how, I don't know how we capture that, but I definitely think we should document the grandfather agreement if the council agrees to that.
Can we though clarify when we say, because this is where I think I got concerned. I thought grandfather meant, okay, that property could always do it, but it's particular animals. So if those animals pass, then they can't replace them. That's what we said in the last.
Right. So as I described, the way that these ordinances are enforced, typically it's through attrition, compliance through attrition. So if you have a pot-bellied pig or you have 3 of them and you love them and you live on 2 acres, we would let one pass away or be given away or something at the owner's determination, and then they couldn't replace that animal. So horses, those kinds of things. So I'm happy to modify the ordinance and put a date in that says, if you currently, house more than the permitted number of animals those animals will not be able to be replaced once they're removed from the property.
My second question or follow-up to that is, how would we actually know if I have 3 pigs in my yard? How would you actually know? Someone would have to complain or have
That's
to
right.
document
It's
it. We really wouldn't know.
always on a complaint basis. Although animal control typically knows the status of livestock in a community the size of Sunnyvale.
Okay, I was just curious.
They're probably very familiar with and know them by name.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mr. Freeman, do you have a comment, sir?
I just don't think we're going to be able to tell one goat from another.
Yeah, so I want to ask an opinion. I'm remembering the specific situation Ms. Guthrie was mentioning. Can we, for me, I tell you, I'm okay to leave it as such, but if council wants to make it tighter, I'm willing to yield. Can we grandfather to the property owner rather than animal? Because if somebody came in with had 2 horses and 1 horse died specifically, and they want to replace, because again, I'm not a horse guy, but people say horses are lonely, they tend to have problems, and I trust them because they know more than I do. Can we grandfather to the owner other than the animal?
I can draft it however a majority of you want me to draft it. What I would recommend is that you address the acreage, because right now you have properties that don't contain an actual acre. They're 1 acre gross, and there are standards for keeping livestock. So I would, right now, if you live on 3/4 of an acre, the way the ordinance is drafted, you'd be allowed to have 2 livestock. So I think we need to address the language regarding acreage as one issue, and then how you want to implement the ordinance as a separate issue.
Thank you. Council, let me ask you, do we want to restrict? You can put it right. You can keep it as that means there's no law. That's the stuff you're saying. Or you can make it 1/2 acre or 1 acre or something. Let me ask that question. Do we want to have that acreage limitation?
I think that, yeah, I think you have to have some type of limitation on that.
Okay.
The fact that we don't have one at this
So what?
point.
I'll say I'll take it down to 1 acre.
Okay.
As opposed to 2.
But even at 1 acre, we have some lots like on Sunbird, or some of those Sun Streets that have an acre, 1.2. And, you know, do we want a horse living? Technically, by statute, if we change it to 1 acre, you can have 2 horses. I agree with you on the holistically, but I'm thinking down the road. Somebody moves here and they want to have 2 cows in their backyard on 1.2 acres. And I see the point of
It's not
being
broken,
careful.
right? Fix it, right?
And I'm just wondering if we would do it and this may be more work, but I'm wondering if we would take a bigger view and say, this can leave it 1 acre, but for maybe large animals or something, there must be some kind of inspection or some kind of appropriateness for livestock, right? On acre. I don't know. You understand what I'm saying? Like we gotta have some kind of way to not have 2.
This particular provision is specifically with regard to livestock.
I know, and that's what I'm
So
worried
it doesn't
about.
apply to non-large, I think 2 goats is the same as 2 cows or 2 horses or.
But the appropriateness would still apply, right? I mean, still, there's some appropriateness to having.
There's a weight limit too, right? A weight threshold. So animals over a certain weight, right?
Yeah,
So goats wouldn't go
300
over 300 pounds, right? Unless you got a really big goat.
Well, if you go over
No.
I would not encourage you to create another inspection step in livestock ownership.
I'll defer.
Do we know how many, if we did do a grandfather clause, do we know how many people would actually be grandfathered in? Does maybe Frank know that, or?
I've heard anecdotally that it's a few, but I don't know who specifically or what the exact number is.
To the 1 acre point, there are some homes, not just Sunbird, maybe it is Sunbird, the Sun Streets, and those residential. I don't know. I'm just thinking if they came over and put a horse in my next door to me in a 1 acre residential lot, nothing town could do to stop that as it stands now. And I'm not sure, and it's not an HOA there either, so the HOA wouldn't monitor. If there's an HOA there, they could monitor for that. But in the case of not having an HOA, you could could you put an elephant there?
It's over 300 pounds. You can't.
It's over 300 pounds. So
Don't die. Elephant on that.
So I don't know. I think it's prudent that you brought it to our attention that we ought to take a look at that. I'll go along with the council, but I'm a little bit worried about some of those residential lots that are 1 acre, 1.2, that you wake up next door and there's a horse, and they call the town and say, hey, there's a horse next door, and smell and whatever else. Nothing you can do about it. So I don't know. Just a little bit of concern on that.
Are there any lots in these neighborhoods that are 1.5 acres? Like the Sun Streets, or any like actual residential areas that are 1.5 acre? So I mean, maybe you think so? Okay. Could we say like, hey, certain neighborhoods are a no, but
Yeah.
okay.
I would do, the other thing you might do is 1 acre per animal up to a maximum of, I mean, the ordinance has, you know, if you have 4 acres, you can have 4 animals. If you have 8, I had it pulled up, hang on. So yeah, if you have 5 acres, you can have 8 animals. So if you did 1 acre per animal on 5 acres, you could have 5 animals. Or you could have 4 animals. That may be an easier way to look at it as well. I think 1 acre is small for 2 head of livestock, just from the standards that I'm aware of.
Yeah, but I actually do know a couple people, not necessarily the same, but I put a cow in their backyard because they could. And so now we bring it to our attention, is that appropriate in our residential areas that don't have an HOA? And I don't know that the answer is yes.
So the way it's currently written, I think everyone felt like that it was being interpreted that it was a typo and that it really was 2 acres or more. So what, you know, your concern was those people who had read the or less and might be in a situation where they bought for that reason. So Brenda did say that she could write it where you grandfather those who own their property or purchased their property and had animals at the time that it was written in that way.
That's
Correct.
So you're exempting the ownership. If the ownership changes, then you have to go to the new rules, right? So if the ownership changes, so I would rather stay with the minimum than the maximum, because I know we have acreage animals. I know in my neighborhood there's animals that you go per acre, per animal per acre. I think we stay with like the minimum. And Mayor, I don't know if you heard what she said, but she could write an exemption that would exempt the current property owner. And if the ownership changed, then the new ordinance would apply to the new ownership. So that would capture anybody that might be impacted, but yet setting the standard moving forward. I actually like that.
Mr. Freeman?
I'm just kind of curious what everyone's thought on numbers are. I know we've thrown out 1, we've thrown out 2, 1.5. I mean, does anybody? I mean, I personally think 1 is a bit small. I mean, but maybe 1.5 would work. I mean, 2 is the number's thrown out. I'm not against it. I think we absolutely have to do it, but just kind of curious on everyone's thoughts on numbers.
Again, this is my thought, right? The moment we put a rule, then you'll start hearing how many people are impacted. If it's not broken, in my opinion, don't mess with it. Don't make it too restrictive. Otherwise, I can forward you the emails.
I think there are other things that would capture nuisance, smell. There's all these other things in the ordinance that would capture some of those issues if we set it at 1 acre. And if somebody did it in a residential neighborhood, I think there are other enforcement options we would have outside just the acreage.
So let me ask you, the homeowner HOAs will not allow in general animal. So we are talking about a large portion of the Sunnyvale is not going to have animals. Right now we are talking about a few older neighborhoods like Sun Streets and the larger properties in general. I'm not opposed to adding a restriction, but I just worry about any time you start applying limits. it will start impacting people, and then you need to come back to it. But the council wants to, I can support it, but I just want to be careful. That's all.
Say, I'd like to continue to talk about it. Maybe postpone, and keep on talking about, look at different ideas. Also, it would be interesting to see who it would impact right now, currently. Who are we looking at for grandfathering? And if we do something, it'd be nice to know that and understand it. Maybe have them have the opportunity to share their thoughts.
Yeah, Mayor, there's a lot in our neighborhood that was actually taken out of the HOA about 4 or 5 years ago. So it sits in the middle of the HOA, but not part of the HOA. And because it's a 1 acre lot, they could actually put a horse there in the middle of the HOA. It's an oddity.
HOA can have animals.
So in our neighborhood, in the Homestead, there is one lot that was taken out of the HOA before we got on the council. And so in that 1 acre lot, if we don't change it, and I know the people that are building there, so I don't think this is an issue for them, but technically they could put a horse on that 1 acre lot in the middle of Homestead.
They could put 2 horses.
They could
the
put
way
2
that
horses
it's currently drafted.
So that's kind of the oddball thing of, now that you've exposed this or discovered this, where do we sit on it? So maybe, Mayor, we should table it, just talk about it a little bit more, check with some of our neighbors and our friends to see what's the impact. And maybe get a better handle on that. I don't know. I mean,
Before we table it, I don't disagree, but I would ask if there's anything, because there's a lot of other changes in this ordinance. Is there anything that's urgent that we need to change? Like I know there's some compliance issues in this ordinance so we can comply with state law. Do we need to pass everything else but that change and come back to that change?
I think it would be beneficial to pass everything else. So if you wanted to just for tonight, leave it as is, and then we could come back and address this issue specifically at a later date.
I like that. Again, I'm going to encourage, if that's the decision of the council, I'm going to encourage you all to talk to your friends and neighbors and get some thoughts. And again, feed the information back to Susan and Charles. That way they have the information ahead of time. Which section is that? Yes, ma'am.
If the council wants to do that, it would be to approve the ordinance, except for the changes to section 2.301A.
And just one more comment on this. I remember these changes, and this was a very hotly contested, debated topic at the time. And so I do hesitate making some change like that without maybe further research, because I remember that.
You are correct, Mr. Finch.
So Charles corrected me. It would be 2.301A subsections 4 and 5. Yes, it's 2.301 subsection A, 4 and 5.
All right. Council, are there additional discussions on item number 10? Okay, if not, can I have a motion with respect to item number 10?
May I make a motion to go ahead?
I'd like to make a motion to approve the current item, except for section 2.301, subsection A, 4 and 5. Approve as is except for that subsection.
You have a second?
I'll second that, Mayor.
Okay. Motion made by Mr. Clark and second by Mr. Allen to approve ordinance 21-05 as presented, except section 2.301, subsection A, 4 and 5. Everyone heard the motion? Are there additional discussions? All in favor signify. All opposed. Motion passed 6. Charles and Brenda and Susan, thank you for all the work. And this is always been a contentious, maybe it's wrong word, hardly debated topic. How about that? Okay, moving on to item number 11. hear a presentation related to the Sunnyvale Police Department's journey to obtain the Texas Best Practice Certification. Good evening, Chief Hawks.
When I sat there, it didn't work either.
They thought it's you, right?
Yeah, that was a purpose.
That's funny. That is funny. Nobody listen to me.
Mentioned it several times. It's in our newsletter. So I just wanted to go over a quick PowerPoint that's anybody can access. It's actually on the TexasPoliceChiefs.org website. And it's put out by our program director, and it just explains what the program is. So I'll just go over that real quick with you. So the overview of the program, it's best practices that are designed to reduce litigation within the police department. There's actually now, this is an older PowerPoint, we actually now have 170 best practices for Texas. And once we meet those standards, then the independent assessors from the program that are trained come in and do an on-site. We've just finished all our 170 best practices. Now we are waiting for our on-site day. It is backed up. We have a lack of assessors right now. So we're only being able to do about 20 agencies a year. There's currently about 173 Texas law enforcement agencies that are recognized. And that's still a relatively low number if you consider there's about 3,000 law enforcement agencies in the state of Texas, about 2,000 municipal departments, and then you have your school district police departments and sheriff's, constables, DA's office, all that. So it's still a pretty elite status to obtain. Next slide. So what are best practices and how do we meet those standards? So we get, next slide, please. We get a form, and it's called a document submission form. And we have one for each standard. And it says what the standard is and then what we have to do to meet that standard. And it goes beyond just saying we have a policy against that. We have to have a policy, and then we have to prove that the officers understand that policy or they've received training in that policy. So the 12 critical issues that all 170 of these practices fall under these 12 critical issues. Use of force, which is what we like to call now, we call it response to resistance instead of use of force, is an outdated term. Emergency vehicle operations and pursuits, search and seizure and arrest, care, custody, and restraint of prisoners, domestic violence and agency employee domestic misconduct, off-duty conduct, off-duty jobs, the selection and hiring process to make sure that process is fair. That's specifically outlined on what our process is and what you got to do to become a Sunnyvale police officer, etc. Sexual harassment training, and some of these standards are yearly. We have to put out the training yearly. They have to take the test yearly. And the good thing about our software is we push these policies out on our software for the training and the training test. So when the officers get notification, hey, you have to go into our software and take sexual harassment training. And then we get a roster of the entire department that they've taken the training and they've passed the test. And then we take those hard copies and we submit them into our file so that when the assessors come, they can see that we proofs of compliance is what we call them. We prove that we met this standard.
So Chief, can I ask a question, Chief? This is really great. I'm very familiar with the similar system in terms of ISO standard and tape. And so I'm not in the police department. I'm familiar with the process. Since SPD is so new and with I'm assuming the data-wise objective evidence, I'm assuming it's going to be limited, right? Because we've been around only for a short.
Yeah.
So how do we satisfy this requirement? Is that the training records? Is that mostly what we have, or the objective evidence to support?
It's different for each standard, but there's some sections that don't apply to us.
Okay.
For example, dispatch.
Okay.
We still have to show what we're doing, but we don't have to meet certain dispatch standards because we don't have a dispatch. So on those standards, I got a letter from the Seagoville chief, and we put that in the file saying, you know, and the ILA. We put the ILA in the file saying we have a contract with Seagoville, and Seagoville has to meet those standards, which they do because they're already a recognized agency as well.
Okay. So this is an example of the document submission form in one standard. So the standard starts out as saying you have to have a written directive or policy, and then explains what that is, and then what you have to do to meet that standard. So you have to have a policy on sexual harassment, then you have to have training, and then you have to have proof of that training. And the assessors will come in, look at the file, check it off, and what they'll also do on the on-site is they're gonna come out and they're gonna ride with the officers. They're gonna talk to our police services coordinator, and they're gonna make sure the officer is wearing a seatbelt when he's driving. They're gonna make sure the officer puts on their traffic vest when they're working a crash. They're gonna make sure the officer practices officer safety on traffic stops. They're gonna make sure that they inspect their vehicle, et cetera, et cetera. And this is just another one. This is a response to resistance documentation and review. So we have to have a policy on it. We have to provide training. We have to show proof of that training. And then we have to actually take one of our response to resistance or use of force reports that we've taken when we use force and insert it into the folder. The program's philosophy is to hold the department to high standards and best practices, but not make it impossible to obtain. The program's real good about helping the agencies along. So when I'm submitting our forms electronically, I'm submitting them to an assessor. And so any questions I have, like, is this going to meet the standard? We communicate really well. And so that if we're not meeting the standard, we know what we got to do to get there. The program goals are to reduce risk and associated cost with operating a law enforcement agency, improve the management and operations of Texas law enforcement agencies, and improve protection of citizens and officer safety. And once we get this recognition, it is a pretty big deal. The program will come and present the plaque to the mayor, and it's something that the town should really be proud of, that the police department's operating, you know, to a high standard. The initial application we filled out the application last year. The first year is paid for by a grant through TML. And then the years after, we will have to pay to stay in the program. It's based on the number of officers you have. Then the independent assessors will come in. They'll do their report, and they'll send their findings to the committee, and then the committee will vote to recognize or not recognize the agency. Chief, let me ask you, as an internal commitment, again, I'm leveraging on my other experience in the automotive and aerospace industry. Do you all have to have, is there an internal audit or assessment you and your team or needs to conduct so often? Sort of kind of getting ready, right? Internal review, and then before the external party comes in. Do you have a process or system for internal assessment?
Yes. So part of the program is there's certain key elements that you have to, once you get recognized, you can't just say, oh, that's it for 4 years. You've got to, there's certain reports that we have to do annually. There's certain training that are required annually and biannually. We have to push out our pursuit report to the program every year. It's a detailed analysis of how many pursuits we had. Then we have one for fleet accidents, response to resistance, and there's one more. I can't remember what it is right now. But there's standards that we have to continually update. But
you or someone will conduct an assessment as well. In other words, making sure that all these reports are sent out.
Yeah,
internal evaluation.
What the program is designed to have is each agency is designed to have the chief overseeing it and a program manager. I'm doing both.
Okay.
So I'm kind of playing two roles. So the program manager is usually the one that makes sure that all this stuff gets done.
Gotcha.
And Mayor, I just want to remind you that during the interview process, when we were setting up the police department, this was kind of a goal that we set, that we wanted to do this. And the chief actually has a lot of experience with this program and is an assessor.
I remember.
Right.
I remember he talking to me about that too.
Right. And so, I mean, I think it really helped. And we all said, hey, we have this great opportunity in standing up a new department to do it right from the get-go. And so, I mean, it was really a benefit to have Chief Hawks knowing what he was doing. So we didn't have to come in and fix a lot of things. We were able to set them up correctly. So having him here was just such a great benefit.
Yeah, I completely support you. This is really good, you know, because I'm familiar with the different certification, different industry. This is the right thing to do. How that assessment and validation.
Like Susan said, we had to come up with our policies from inception, so we made sure that they were in compliance from the get-go. And like I said, we're going to be in line for our final assessment, and that's when 2 chiefs will come. And one of our policies of the program is to make sure that they're from out of the region. So my buddy from across town doesn't come in to do my assessment. I'm going to Wichita Falls next month to do theirs. So we make sure we have that kind of transparency too.
Who coordinates this one?
His information is at the end of the slide. His name's Max Westbrook. He's the director of the program. Okay. And then we have an assessor director, which is Monty Stanley. He's a retired assistant chief from Carrollton. And then once we get it recognized, if they vote to recognize us, then like I said, they'll give us our recognition status, and they'll tell us we're the 176th agency in Texas to be awarded recognition status. Our cost is 11 to 25 officers, so our initial cost was $500, and that's an annual fee. But the first year was paid for by a TML grant. And the program benefits is that the council, mayor, town manager, and the citizens of town are assured that the police department is complying with best practices of Texas law enforcement. The additional cost, of course, is membership for the chief and on-site fees. In other words, when the assessors come, we'll have to put them up in the hotel room for 2 days and feed them. That's about it. And we'll be recognized for 4 years, and then after that 4 years, we have to go through the whole process again and be re-recognized, and they'll come back in and do an on-site. This is now at 173 agencies recognized, and there's 35 of us, including Sunnyvale PD, in the program. And like I said, the on-site's backed up right now, but I'm optimistic that we're going to get in around August, September. And there's our program. Any questions?
That's awesome, Chief. I'm very, very, very pleased. Council?
I'll just reiterate what the mayor said. I think this is a great program and glad we're doing it, and striving to make the police department the best we can be with best practices and really good policies. So thank you very much for all your work on this.
When we do it, let's do it right.
And I want to add something that's kind of off topic a little bit. I have a couple of friends who've gone with the ride along and have had nothing but great things to say. Officers are great. Experience is great. Seems like everybody's doing the right thing. So the police department's doing excellent. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Chief.
Good work.
Okay.
And Mayor, we will not have executive session tonight.
We won't.
No, sir.
Okay. Do I need to cancel that, or I don't just recess into it? Okay. All right. Some of you will be sad, but item number 12, Mayor and Council request for future staff updates and agenda items. Any items? Okay. If not, I'm going to move on to last item, that is adjournment. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion made by Mr. Allen, seconded by Mr. Freeman to adjourn. All in favor, signify. All opposed, motion passed 6-0. Now time is 8:30, and tonight's meeting is adjourned. Again, thanks everybody, Chief, and all the officers. Susan, thanks. Brenda, thank you.